Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. The Nigerian heavyweight Efe Ajagba has advanced to 14-0 following a win over Jonnie Rice in the Top Rank bubble in Las Vegas. A unanimous decision, so the cards 98-92 and the other two 99-91. And perhaps for me, the 99-91 cards are a little bit cruel towards Jonnie Rice, because I thought he won at least 2 rounds, possibly 3, and there were some even-ish rounds that you could have argued either way. But this was a fight where there was no debate over the winner. But the thing for Efe Ajagba is it wasn't a fantastic performance. He was patient, he was workmanlike, he got the win, and that's really what matters, but he really wasn't that impressive in this fight. And in the first 5 rounds of this 10-round fight, or maybe I should say the first 4 rounds, it was a very even and competitive fight. The fight sort of really started to sway more Ajagba's way once Jonathan Rice started to gas, and that was pretty visible from about round 5 onwards. Round sort of 6, 7, and 8, he was starting to, look a bit ragged in terms of the breathing. He was really sucking in the big ones, and as that sort of occurred, he sort of went more into a survival mode, less punches, and Ajagba behind the jab just really started to rack up the rounds. But there was a sort of sense with this fight that you thought Efe Ajagba could have done a bit more. He could have upped his work rate a bit more, and that's something he's actually known for. But he just wasn't able to sort of really put it on Jonathan Rice in the way that I think many of us would have expected. And actually, Rice sort of threw up a different sort of strategy. I think a lot of us thought he would be utilizing movement more, but perhaps with his conditioning, maybe he felt that he wouldn't be able to keep it up through the 10 rounds. From the bell, Jonathan Rice was wanting to take the center of the ring, and he had his left hand quite low, even from the first round, tempting Efe Ajagba to throw the right hand, and then Rice was looking for counters. And this was something through the fight, especially the first half, that Rice was landing a lot of really good, nice right hands. And part of that was because Efe Ajagba just wasn't moving his head. And again, that was an issue that was sort of highlighted through this fight. And he was caught with a number of punches in round 9 as well, some good counters. And that was a round I thought, given that round was a low volume round, as were most of the rounds in this fight, I thought you could have given that one to Rice for the more clean, effective work. But behind the jab, Efe Ajagba dominated stretches of the fight. And I say dominated in the sense that Rice sort of went into his shell. Obviously, he was gassing in the second half of the fight, and it was a much sort of more low volume fight than I think many of us would have been expecting. Bearing in mind that Efe Ajagba generally throws somewhere around 74 punches per round. In this one, he was kept to 40.6. So that's quite a big difference. And part of that was actually Jonathan Rice. He was able to sort of shut down some of Efe Ajagba's offense. There was lots of feints. There was just a lot of movement where it looked like Rice was going to do something, but he never really intended to do anything. And that was sort of making Ajagba think. And perhaps some of the recent fights where Ajagba has been more high volume and has been clipped a bit more, he was a little bit reticent just to let his hands go. But that ultimately ended up seeing Ajagba throwing a lot of just one-off punches. And, he is a guy who was known for his right hand, a good 1-2. Didn't really see the 1-2 a lot in this fight. And some of that, and the credit can go to Jonathan Rice for sort of taking the right hand away for different stretches. And there were a few times there was a good punch landed in round 2 where Jonathan Rice was visibly rocked by a right hand. But it was few and far between. There was a lot of one-off punching, and different stretches of the fight too, especially round 6 to 8. It just kind of felt more of the same. There wasn't a lot of variation from Efe Ajagba, a lot of one-off punching, mostly jabs, but he was actually investing to the body with the jab, and that was a highlight of his offense. The jab in general, he landed over 100 in the fight, many to the body as well, and that was slowly taking the stuffing out of Rice and obviously, getting him to retreat a bit more into his shell, because there was a survival mode sort of type atmosphere after about round 5. Overall though, like I say, workman-like effort. but I don't think a lot of people are going to be impressed with the performance. Sort of heading into the fight, the commentary talked about the young up-and-comers, etc. Efe Ajagba was lumped in with that sort of crew, which, the names of Tony Yoka, Arslanbek Makhmadov, Daniel Dubois, etc. And they were expecting big things in this fight. Remember, this was a short-notice fight for Jonathan Rice, who was actually 18 pounds lighter than his last fight, but he hadn't had a full camp, and I think that sort of caught up with him in the middle of the fight. But I guess a lot of people will say it was actually alarmingly competitive for the first 4 rounds. I mean, maybe round 2 was actually quite a strong round for Ajagba, but there was a lot of counter shots that Rice was landing almost with ease, and the head movement issue is something that even with the change of trainer, and we've sort of talked about this for about the last 12 to 18 months, that it's an issue, that he's got some defensive frailties, he doesn't move his head, and he can be caught. That's going to catch up with him as he goes to the next level. But on the positive side, this was a fight where he got some rounds. He's able to implement some of the things from the gym into, a fight setting. Obviously, the head movement wasn't one of them, but in terms of working the jab to the body, he invested more to the body with the jab than I think I've seen him in any other fight. The jab overall was good, but, it's on the sort of negative side. The punch variation sort of seemed to be less than it was for more recent fights, where against Razvan Kajanu, you could see there was a bit of evolution where he was throwing a few different punches, but the left hook, that was one that could have been thrown, and he is capable of throwing, but it really sort of seemed to be sort of holstered in this fight. Overall, he was workmanlike. He was patient, and that's one of the sort of attributes of Efe Ajagba that I think will take him far in the heavyweight division. He doesn't really seem to sweat under pressure. He sort of rode out the sort of competitiveness in those first sort of few rounds, and then started to break Rice down, which in itself, that is actually a good trait to have. And just on alone on the jab and a good right hand, that's going to take him into bigger and better fights in the heavyweight division. And the commentary actually noted that when it spoke to Efe Ajagba in the fighter meeting ahead of the fight, he was asked about, when would you like to be fighting for a title? And he said 2 years' time. And I think based on what we are seeing in the ring, that with the development that is still clearly needed, 2 years is probably actually a realistic timeline. It's no point sort of saying, hey, I'm going to be in a title fight in 2021, when clearly it's not going to happen because of other factors in the heavyweight division, but he's not ready. And I know some people will be unimpressed with the performance, probably writing him off completely. But as I've been saying, the brakes have well and truly been pumped on the hype associated with Efe Ajagba from early in his career. And he is more raw than I think people earlier in his career believed he was. So for me, this was an appropriate test at this time, because clearly he was getting a lot out of this fight. We may not have seen a lot of the improvement that we were maybe hoping for, but it was a fight where he was still able to do some nice things, but obviously there's a lot to work on, and the level wasn't such that it was beyond him. Because I think if it was a couple of steps above, and if someone was putting it on him, especially, throughout the fight, not just for the first half of it, could have been a different result. But overall, the cards looked comfortable for him, but it maybe didn't reflect, the sort of competitive nature in some of the rounds, because it wasn't a fight that you sort of thought it was going to be stopped at any moment. Some Ajagba fights earlier in his career, it was just a matter of time. And I guess some people as well will be questioning his power. Is the power really cracked up to what the hype earlier in his career suggested it was? They were talking about this guy's got Deontay Wilder style power. I think with some of the recent fights, and he's gone the distance again with another opponent here, Jonathan Rice, all 10 rounds, and then you also have him going all 10 rounds with Ali Aaron Demirjian. And Rice, while he was clipped with a couple of good shots, maybe not completely flush, it didn't look like he was going to be sort of on the verge of sort of getting out of there at any point. So the power, that's the question, because for a guy like Efe Ajagba, who doesn't necessarily have especially fast hands or especially fast feet, he needs to have heavy hands to sort of, go with that jab, because obviously that's going to be his moneymaker in the heavyweight division. So I think the breaks, some people will be reassessing again their place for Ajagba in the terms of the best prospects. I still think he's a prospect to watch, but we just have to keep our expectations in check. He's going to need that 2 years to develop. Other guys are probably clearly a bit ahead of him at the moment and could step into title fights a bit sooner. You know, the likes of a Daniel Dubois or Filip Hrgovic, for example. Maybe in the next year or so, they would be ready. But I think Ajagba's going to need every second of that 2 years. So not a great performance by Ajagba, but a win is a win. And he stays undefeated, beats Jonnie Rice by unanimous decision. What did you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often, hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.